So DES Action was started because of a drug called diethylstilbestrol given to pregnant women during the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. The women were told that the drug would help them have healthy, big, bouncing babies and avoid miscarriages. The drug was the product of bad science, and instead of doing what was advertised, instead it harmed the fetuses. It actually harmed the mothers to whom the drug was given. Primarily, the mothers to whom the drug was given were ended up with a high rate of breast cancer, and the children, both male and female, ended up with fertility and reproductive organ problems, issues, health challenges. DES Action was started 40 years ago to educate, to advocate, to help identify, and to empower those who have been exposed and damaged by DES. We are both a volunteer and a membership organization, so thank you for all the members out there. Membership is only $40 a year and helps fund activities like the Facebook Live. We'll get you your quarterly newsletter, The Voice, and give you access to pretty much the biggest repository of information on DES, diethylstilbestrol, available in the United States. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Susan Helmrich. Susan was a very early activist in the DES scene. She was not so much active with DES Action, but with an organization that we were very close with, that DES Action was very close with, DES Cancer Network. It was called DCN. Obviously, it was, I don't know if it would be called a sister organization, but there's a lot of crossover between the organizations and a lot of unified efforts. I'm glad you're here now, and thank you on behalf of everyone who's ever been harmed by exposure to DES. Thank you for your actions back in the 1980s and 90s, when I think you were very active in that area. And the way I'd like to structure this conversation is to talk about the early days when you were first involved, why you got involved, how DES damaged you, how you dealt with that. But what really interested me, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the telephone. I should look at the camera. What really interested me in talking to Susan was that there are a lot of very interesting and wonderful people who did great things for DES, DES Action, DCN. But Susan has gone on and made an entire, built a life that has empowered herself personally and is focused on wellness, wholeness, positive consciousness, and I believe is a life coach also, a wellness coach. So the arc of this conversation, I hope, will start with DES and end up talking about the positive aspects of her life today. Okay, Susan?
I got it. Yep.
Okay.
First of all, thank you for having me. I'm very honored.
Thank you. We're glad you took time out of your day, and everyone's anxious to hear about you. So you started, you were in college and an elite level swimmer, competitive swimmer, when you were diagnosed with vaginal cancer, with 2 malignant tumors. Is that true?
Correct. Yep.
Great. So you were stuck with a month's worth of surgery and recovery. And was that when you got involved with DCN?
Well, I actually first did get involved with DES Action. We started out as one organization, and there were, what happened is that there were the exposed women who were terrified about what was going to happen to them. And then there was a small group of us, Vicki Dandridge, Joyce Bickler, Margaret Braun, a woman from Canada, Harriet Simon, and we were part of DES Action. But what happened was, in much of the conversation, is that there were women terrified about the effects, and then there were those of us who already had the effects. And so it was a natural kind of a division, but not, it wasn't like us and them, but it was like what to do about the women who already were affected terribly.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So that's why you slightly separated off and could focus more on those issues then. Sure.
Right. So those of us who had vaginal cancer and had vaginectomies and hysterectomies and knew we couldn't have children versus the women who were not sure whether they could have children. There was this what do we do? What is our little group? How do we handle it? It was before Facebook. It was before cell phones. It was before the internet. And really, honestly, I don't know how we all found one another, but we did. And most through word of mouth. People would contact DES Action and identify themselves as a cancer daughter, and then they would kind of come over to our side, our camp. But we really did work together.
Good. And that's what I always heard, was a very friendly organization, and people moved back and forth as was appropriate for them.
Correct.
So, right. And then, so then you actually gave up swimming, I assume, at that point?
No, I actually did not give up swimming. I was diagnosed right at the end of my college swimming career, at which point I had a 10-and-a-half-hour operation and had a hysterectomy, vaginectomy, that worked, 10-and-a-half hours, spent a month in the hospital.
Yeah.
Obviously could not swim. But as soon as I was able, and that was true for me for each of my cancer episodes, I would get back in the pool. So, I didn't think I would live, but if I was going to live for a short amount of time as I thought I would, I was going to do it swimming.
What was the prognosis then? Did you have any idea? Did they tell you that you could recover from this? Did you expect to recover?
And I know that Vicki is on, and it's like no one said much. I mean, it was like I was 21 years old. I was told I had vaginal cancer. Like, nobody said the word cancer, vagina, anything. And it was like, so the prognosis was never talked about because I think nobody really knew. I mean, it was a new cancer for young women. They took out my vagina and they made me a new one with my colon. And
Right.
in the DCN, we watched a lot of young women die. So I don't think there was a clear path for any of us. We didn't know what lied ahead. And so I did grow up through my 20s thinking, I'm not going to live very long.
Right. Well, but you kept going. You got a PhD.
Yeah, I did. So I wanted to go to medical school in college. That was my career path that I thought I was going to go on. I applied to medical school, but it was right at the end of college when I was diagnosed, and I never really fulfilled that process. Was in the hospital for a month, in and out for a year. I was at Sloan Kettering. I was in and out that entire year with bowel obstructions and various problems from the surgery. And I decided I never want to be a doctor because I don't want to spend so much time in hospitals. So I took the public health route. And I went into epidemiology because I started reading about DES and what it did. And I thought, well, I'll be an epidemiologist and I'll help prevent this from ever happening again, which wasn't true. I mean, it's happening today, still happening 40 years later. But so I went to the Harvard School of Public Health. I got my master's, and then after that, I was working in a place called the Drug Epidemiology Unit, part of Boston University Medical School, where I studied the long-term effects of prescription and over-the-counter drugs in relationship to cancer. And that was my focus for about 7 years.
I'm not sure that I could take I'm not sure I could do that. That would be so hard to work on DES and cancer when I had been affected by it. But you're a strong person.
Looking at DES. I was looking at the pill. I was looking at other prescription medications. I was looking at over-the-counter aspirin. I was looking at all kinds California to get my PhD, I switched completely to health. I became an exercise epidemiologist, and I studied the relationship between physical activity and health. Then I was done. I was done with the bad stuff.
But in the meantime, you did work with Dr. Herbst, and your name is on a lot of published papers.
I did. So I was involved in the early studies, and I was on those papers both as an epidemiologist and as a consumer advocate. So this was the first time that NIH brought physicians, epidemiologists, consumer advocates, lawyers, everybody working in the field of DES together, and we together approached the issue under one umbrella. And so I was kind of wearing two hats when many of those studies were being done.
It's really a wonderful way to work. Now, you're the collegial way where many voices can come in, and it was kind of a new concept, I believe, at the time. You were still very active, though, in policy making. You mentioned that you helped pass the bill in New York State, so that had to be through that time period also.
Right. So that was...
what was the bill?
The 80s. The bill was the toxic tort...
Right.
Actually, it's framed in my study here. I forget the exact title, but it was the toxic tort something bill in New York State. And in New York State, I was barred from suing because there was a statute of limitations in New York that said you had until you were 21, so you were adult, to sue for anything that happened to you prior as a child, or 3 years from the time of your injury. Well, I was injured in utero, and I didn't know I had a problem until I was 21 and a half. Joyce Bickler led the way, but she was younger when she got diagnosed, so she was allowed to sue, and I was not allowed to sue. So I lobbied the New York State legislature for 7 years and knocked on the doors of every single legislator in New York, and finally the bill passed, and it was for DES and 4 other toxic exposures, and they passed a discovery law window. They opened the window.
Yeah, and I have to thank you personally, because I too was damaged with DES and could not sue until that law passed, and because of your hard work, and it never occurred to me to try to change a law. I was not active.
I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew it was wrong. Wrong.
Yes, it was wrong, and that law still stands, and it protects so many people. It's really changed the legal scene throughout, and because of you, I could sue also, and the money that I was given in settlements was not a significant amount of money, but the punitive damage that I could do back to the drug companies, I wanted to do what I could do. So.
Right. Right. My money wasn't great either, but it did open the door.
Yes. And thank you personally, and on behalf of a lot of other people. But and then you weren't done with cancer. Unfortunately, you had two more cancer episodes. Significant.
Really,
ones.
Very bad. Yeah, most of them were not great. I had a tumor in my lung when I was 42, and a tumor in my pancreas when I was 53.
Ugh.
And I'll be 63 this year.
Ah, happy birthday.
Thanks. Well, yeah, not till November.
Well, it's a good age. Let's keep adding to it. But congratulations.
Right. I never thought I'd make it. Never ever.
I was talking to Judith Halfand a couple of months ago, and
I saw you.
She was so much fun to talk to, and I was very struck by what she said. She lived with the fear of dying from a DES related cancer or a DES related problem for years, and now has gotten to old enough that she is hopeful and feels somehow internally confident that she'll die of something else than cancer caused by DES, and I hope she's right. So, yay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't have that level of confidence. Not because I feel like I'll die of cancer caused by DES, but because I've had cancer 3 times, I kind of keep thinking I don't have very many organs left to get cancer, but there are a few, and I'm always kind of waiting for that shoe to drop.
Well, if you don't mind my sharing, we spoke earlier, and you were saying that with the pancreatic cancer, they had to take out half of your pancreas, your gallbladder, your duodenum. Did I say that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And all what were left of your reproductive organs.
No. In that, my reproductive organs were gone when I was 21. That was
okay.
all in
that was in the first one.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The second one was the superior lobe of my lung, and then the third was a Whipple, which the Whipple is that full-on digestive organs, everything.
Yes.
Was removed. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but we were speaking earlier, and I wanted to bring this up again because it was so interesting. You were saying how the odds of even though the only cancer that you can point to that was brought on by the exposure to DES would have been the vaginal cancer, that once having one cancer for any reason makes you more vulnerable for some unknown reason to other cancers. Did I say that right?
Yes. Yes. The greatest risk factor for having a second cancer is having a first cancer.
No matter...
And no matter what. And so, and much of that is due to radiation and chemotherapy, which I did not have. But radiation and chemotherapy will wreak havoc on one's body and then make them vulnerable or susceptible to getting other cancers. What I believe is that my exposure to DES did something to my DNA in utero. Yes, it caused my vaginal cancer, for sure. But then there's a mutation or something happened, and which made me vulnerable to getting these 2 other cancers. These 2 other cancers are called neuroendocrine cancers.
Mm-hmm.
So something happened. There was an endocrine disruptor that affected my DNA in some way. And nobody, not any physician, not any epidemiologist, has been able to identify a clear path from my DES exposure to my lung or pancreatic cancer. But I believe, and we all believe, that something happened. But we can't show it in a study. I have never found another. I'm an N of 1 of DES-exposed women. I'm the only one that has these 3 weird cancers.
Well, if anybody else knows of anyone who had these 3 unique cancers, please let us know, and we'll connect you to Susan. But
yeah,
Susan,
definitely.
Susan, we just got an interesting question from Christine Weiss-Winberry, and I hope she doesn't mind if I read it. I think everyone else can read it, but you can't because you're talking.
I can see it.
Oh.
I can see it.
Okay. Do you want to comment on that? She's very interested in the talcum powder lawsuit, and there's very little. We actually. I'm going to jump in, Susan, to say.
Go ahead.
I met with Michael London, and we have a Facebook Live with Michael London, who is still taking DES cases. He has a few. He couldn't describe them too specifically, of course, for both HIPAA and legal reasons on air. But what he could say very generally was, it's just hard to link it back to DES unless it's CCA at this point, and even having CCA as an adult is not as. There are other reasons why a senior woman might get CCA other than DES. So you need a clear path that you were a DES daughter and had CCA. But I would encourage you to go look. If anyone is interested in pursuing a lawsuit today for any reason, for breast cancer, for any reproductive cancers, please take a look at that interview with Michael London. He's based in New York. There are some other attorneys across the country. And if you go on our website, members can go on to the attorneys list. There's not a lot of them, but there are a few. And just ask questions. It doesn't hurt to ask questions, and if it makes you, brings you some comfort or brings you some money, you win a lawsuit, that would be amazing. I would love to see a clear legal path for DES daughters, but there hasn't been a whole lot.
Exactly. That's a great answer. I think, and now that we're so far removed from exposure and records and, first-hand stories about what happened, it gets harder and harder. It was hard enough 30 years ago.
Yes.
I was 3 weeks in a trial, and it was impossible to go against Eli Lilly. I mean, we won, but we didn't win on a verdict. We settled.
Right.
So these things are just really, really tough. And Christine writes, how is it that they never apologize? Well, they never will.
Yeah, they won't.
They won't. They don't have to. It's like, it's the changing of the guard. It's all new people. I'm sure the people at Lilly don't even know about what happened.
But the people who work there now, they don't. They really don't know.
Right, exactly.
Too many people don't know. I'm looking away for people who are looking at me on the screen because Barbara Haynes sent an email earlier today, which I believe I shared with you, Susan, and I just want to read a bit of it because I think it's right on point for what we're talking about now. She said, I've noticed in print and online that at least 2 prominent science magazines and NPR have recently run articles about a reduced need for Pap smears given the effectiveness of HPV testing and vaccinations. She's responded to these. I'm going to do this. And when writers give no serious mention of, I'll just read. I've responded to these articles to remind the writers that non-HPV cervical cancers are still a problem and that many of the women at risk of them don't know they are at risk. When writers give no serious mention of these, phrases similar to almost all or nearly all cervical cancers are often used just once in an article, otherwise encouraging women to rely on HPV testing alone. They mislead women. Barbara goes on to say, I was thrilled when the HPV vaccine came out. So many lives would be saved. But this new development of avoiding PAPs strikes me as short-sighted and downright dangerous for DES daughters and possibly others. I hope the topic will come up in your speaker's discussion on Facebook. As a DES daughter diagnosed years ago with adenocarcinoma of the cervix, I can say the Pap test saved my life. I'm sure they will continue to provide early detection for others. Yes, thank you. I think that was very on point, and I would love for everybody who got the HPV vaccination to continue to get Pap smears. I'm not a doctor. Everyone should talk to their doctor, learn everything else, but it just seems clear to me that it is a very non-intrusive test with very few false positives, the Pap test. Anyway, Susan, do you have any comment on that?
No, I'm not a doctor. So,
Yes.
I would say talk to doctors, and you have to do what's right, for you and your particular situation. And, for someone like me, I don't have a cervix. So,
Right.
But
Neither do I.
Everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so, I still get a Pap test.
I will tell you a funny story while we're here. I've just been having some issues, and I had to go get an MRI at Stanford where I had all my last surgeries, and the tech said, I'm going to put some gel in your vagina so I get a better image of your vagina, cervix, fallopian tubes, and ovaries. And I said, well, good luck with that because they're not there.
Obviously, this person did not read your chart. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, one of those, like, if you find them, would you let me know? Because they're not there. Anyway, so, everybody has to approach every one of these medical decisions with their doctor and what's right for them.
Yes. Megan asks, is there a means of testing if certain cancers and abnormalities are caused by DES exposure? Again, I know Susan doesn't want to answer medical questions because she's not a doctor. I'm not a doctor, but I am less cautious. But my understanding is that you cannot. There are the cancer CCA of vagina and cervix and reproductive organs is linked to DES, but nothing else is really directly, there's no test to say this is caused by DES. And Susan, please, if you want to comment, do comment.
Right, exactly. I mean, well, none of us are young anymore, but in the 70s and 80s, when a young woman was diagnosed with clear cell adenocarcinoma of the vagina, it was 99.9% caused by DES. It had to be, because that signature study that showed the relative risk for exposure and vaginal cancer was infinity. There was no other, even smoking and lung cancer wasn't a relative risk of infinity. But we knew then that if you had clear cell adenocarcinoma of the vagina, it was definite. That was the signature cancer. And so it was by default, you knew you were exposed. But there wasn't a test to say to go the other way around.
Right.
Like, if you were exposed, will you get it? No, you don't know that.
Right. But if you got it, you'd be exposed. Yes.
Exactly.
Karen points, I keep pointing on the wrong finger. I'm sorry. I'm reading on the screen. Karen Kalishman is our member manager, and she at DES Action, and she answers all of our 800 number phone calls and our email questions. And she points out, and I'm going to put a shameless plug for DES Action and the work that we do, that the USPS Task Force, so that's the United States Preventative Services Task Force. Deirdre, I need your help, please. Force guidelines for cervical cancer screening lists DES exposure as an exception to the guidelines for the average woman. And Karen and I both fought for that very hard. So, yay. I'm glad we had a small win there, an important win. And good. Okay. So let's move off the health issues and on to healthful living, if I can. You returned to swimming. You're now presently nationally ranked as a master's swimmer. Is that what one calls it? Master's referring to your age, I guess.
Yeah, I am. I mean, that's, there's not many of us around, so I am nationally ranked among the people who are doing. There are a lot, actually. Yes, I should.
Don't be modest. You're very, very good at that.
Yes, I am.
Good. But you went on after years of working on DES things, and now you are the owner of Health and Wellness Matters. And can you tell us a little bit about this?
Well, it's just one of the things that I do. I retired as an epidemiologist. I don't do that. And so when I stopped doing epidemiology, I was trying to figure out how I could help make people kind of embrace being healthy, and even in the face of adversity, in the face of cancer or heart disease or diabetes or whatever. And so I became a certified wellness coach, and I meet with people who want to figure out how to live a healthy life. And so that's what I help people do. And that could be anything from nutrition to, mostly it's around exercise. I help people how to figure out how to fit that into their busy lives, how to reduce stress, how to sleep right, how to hydrate, how to, all those things. But I don't tell anybody what to do. I help them figure it out. And that's my job as a coach.
Mm-hmm. So, and do you work with a lot of different people?
All different kinds of people and different, men and women. My husband is a psychiatrist who often refers some of people that come to him who he really doesn't think need to see a psychiatrist, but rather need a coach. So we work together sometimes, and but it's just, there's no one kind of, I will say most people come to me who want to lose weight, but that's not really what I'm all about.
Sure. Losing weight's important to a certain point, but not all the way.
Yeah.
You need a certain amount of weight.
I try to tell people to be healthy, to be as healthy as they can before something bad happens, and something will. It doesn't have to be cancer or heart disease, but you might sprain your ankle, you might
Yeah.
do something, and so that's my approach.
Well,
But that's only one piece of what I do. I mostly do run this swim to raise money for cancer research. That takes up even more of my time.
so what does that mean? What do you run? What do you do?
So I work for an organization, a national organization called Swim Across America, and we have 20 swims all around the United States in open water. Ours in San Francisco is in the San Francisco Bay, and the event directors run the swim and local cancer centers, and so our swim, every swim focuses on a of cancer research. Mine is pediatric cancer research in San Francisco. And last year we gifted $620,000.
Wow.
In one morning, we raised that much money, and share our goal is
Susan, you're beginning to break up a little bit. Did you move to another place? Susan?
No. No, I'm still here.
Okay, good. Okay, so.
Did you hear that? Did you hear that?
I hear that, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. For a moment you sounded far away. I don't know.
Oh, no, I'm still here.
Good.
Same position. Okay.
So is that so that must feel great. I mean, is that how you keep a positive attitude? Because I'll tell you, I get so frustrated with what I see going on in the pharmaceutical world. I spend, all my days looking at, medicines and drugs and the damages that they do. And I tell you, it's hard to keep cheerful for me sometimes.
Well, I don't go there anymore.
Yes.
I did spend a lot of my time in that world, and I chose to be in the health and wellness and swimming world. I work with amazing doctors who are treating kids with cancer, and I work with Olympians who come and visit the children in the hospitals. And so I do, kind of choose to be in that positive world, because that negative world made me very sad.
Yeah.
So, I do try to stay positive in that way.
That sounds great.
But I admire the people who are still fighting the fight.
Well, you fought it earlier in your life. I'm fighting it later in my life. So fair is fair.
And thank you.
It's a torch. Yeah. Here's a question from Mary Lou Berrien. You probably saw it. Hello from a longtime member. Does Susan know how long her mother took DES during her pregnancy? Was it full term?
I do not know the answer. My mother had my brother, then miscarried, and then had me. No, miscarried, and then had my brother, and then had me. And I kind of think it was the whole pregnancy, but we don't know.
We have a question. If you would give us some advice, and in addition to swimming, what are other simple things we can do to lead a healthier life and a more wellness-oriented life?
Walk a lot. Walk at least an hour a day. I am a firm believer of being outdoors, being in nature as much as you can. If it's swimming isn't your thing, a dance class or any kind of thing that will kind of increase your endorphins. And at the very least, we can, if you're able, I would say, get on a walking program. Get a Fitbit, count your steps, and walk. And really, really pay attention to what's going in your body. I really believe that we have to feed our body with the healthiest foods, nothing processed. I hardly eat sugar. I won't eat anything fried or fatty. Good fats are great, avocado, olive oil, but I think are critical to what goes inside our body is everything, and exercise.
Good. Great. Okay. I think I've run out to the end of my questions. Is anybody type quickly if you have a question for Susan? But I think I'll let her go and say thank you, people, for your questions. Thank you, Susan, for having being so inspiring and so positive. And I'm going to go out and take a walk.
Good. Thank you. And if anyone has any questions for me, my email is susanhelmrich@gmail.com. I'm happy to answer anything I can. Or find me on Facebook.
Great. Deirdre's saying one more thing. What is that, Deirdre? Deirdre's my tech person here today. Are you talking about Julana? No. Sorry. Yeah, but there's no question there. So yeah, a lot of people have been sharing their personal stories. I think that's great, and I want everyone to know that everyone can see your comments on here. We will be leaving this up on Facebook on the DES Action page on Facebook for just a week or two, and then we'll be moving it. It will be simultaneously on the DES Action USA website for another month until we do our next Facebook Live, which will be with Fran Howell and Carrie Christensen on, I believe it's August 20. Oh gosh, it's the last Monday in August. I'm sorry, I should know that, and I forgot what it is. But we'll be posting it on Facebook and Twitter and in the DES Daughters group. I'd like to remind everybody again that this is the 40th anniversary of DES Action. We are a very small staff. We depend on your membership dollars, on your donation dollars. We just sent out a special appeal asking people to donate a little bit above and beyond the membership fees if you can afford to do it. And I should also remind people that DES Action will never accept pharmaceutical support or advertising. DES Action is now a sister organization with MedShadow. MedShadow is a not-for-profit that I started 5 years ago because I, very much like Susan Helmrich, wanted to make sure that DES could never happen again. And I don't have that power, but I do have the power to work with DES Action, other organizations, and MedShadow to save lives by reminding people that medicines have side effects, and to do your best to use medicines as sparingly as makes them effective. So to limit the stress on your kidneys and livers until you really do need medicines, because we're all going to need them at some point. So thank you all, and I'll see you next week. Thank you, Susan. You were great.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye-bye.